The sirens were the final soundtrack to his empire. They screamed beneath the glass walls of our penthouse, red light flashing across the marble floors, bouncing off the same surfaces that once hosted our champagne toasts and investor dinners. Outside, cameras were already gathering. I could see their silhouettes through the rain-streaked windows, phones raised like weapons of truth. Ethan was packing, barefoot, shirt half-buttoned, his voice breaking with disbelief. "This can't be happening," he muttered. "They can't just print lies." But the TV didn't lie. The headlines burned across the screen in bold betrayal. Coal Tech under investigation, CEO linked to fraud and corporate cover-up. The colour drained from his face. His phone rang again, his lawyer probably, or one of the partners demanding explanations. He ignored it. And me. I sat perfectly still on the sofa in my silk robe, tea cooling between my palms, watching the life he built collapse in real time. Not a flinch, not a blink, just the quiet satisfaction of inevitability. When he finally looked at me, truly looked, something shifted in the room. The man who once controlled everything couldn't control the silence. "You," his voice cracked, "you did this." I tilted my head, a small, polite smile tracing my lips. "Who else?" He took a step closer, like he didn't believe it, like I was still the girl who apologized when he raised his voice. But that girl was gone. Because this wasn't rage. This was balance. The sirens grew louder. The world outside was closing in, and for the first time I didn't feel trapped inside his story. I felt free inside mine. "Let me take you to how we got to this moment. It all started 3 months ago. They say love softens you. For me, it sharpened everything. Back then, mornings smelled like bergamot and polished ambition. Ethan would leave early, tailored suit, perfect tie, that quiet hum of self-importance trailing behind him like cologne. I'd wait to find fresh lilies in the kitchen, breakfast already plated, the illusion of care wrapped in routine. People thought we were perfect. And maybe we were if perfection meant being beautifully staged, expertly filtered, and emotionally hollow. Our apartment sat 30 floors above the city, glass, steel, and silence. You could see the skyline stretch endlessly, all gleaming towers and ambition. I used to stand by the window and wonder if anyone below could tell that happiness doesn't echo through glass. Ethan was a man who loved to curate. His life, his company, his relationships, all edited for appearance, even me, especially me. He'd brush a strand of hair behind my ear before an event and whisper, "You're my calm, Maya. You make me look grounded." And I'd smile because that's what was expected. But behind every smile I was shrinking piece by piece. At first it was harmless. He'd gently correct me in front of friends, make jokes at my expense, the kind that sound affectionate until you realize they're rehearsed. Then came the suggestions: "Change your lipstick, this dress photographs better, don't post that, it's too revealing." Each one small. Each one easy to excuse. Until the day I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman looking back. One evening we hosted a dinner for investors. I remember the sound of their laughter, too loud, too male, echoing off the marble. Ethan stood at the head of the table, telling stories that painted him as self-made, disciplined, visionary. Every word about his rise left out how many times I stayed awake drafting proposals, sending follow-up emails, catching mistakes he'd later call genius. But I clapped, smiled, played my part, because that's what good women do in curated love stories. They make their men look brilliant. And then I met her. Leela. She walked into that dinner like the room was already hers. Confident, composed, not performing for anyone. Ethan introduced us with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "She's our new operations lead," he said, voice warm but too casual. "Ours?" Leela extended her hand, a firm shake, professional, but her gaze lingered an extra second. "He talks about you all the time." There was nothing wrong with her tone. Nothing obvious. But something beneath it, a private joke I wasn't in on, made the air feel heavy. Later that night I pretended to sleep as Ethan's phone lit up beside him. The name glowed against the dark. "Leela, you were incredible tonight." I stared at it until the light dimmed, until the screen turned black. No confrontation, no tears. Just silence. That same dangerous silence I'd learned to master. I turned off the phone, placed it carefully back on the nightstand, and whispered into the darkness. Not yet. Because that night wasn't an ending. It was the blueprint of something far more deliberate. Men like Ethan think they're playing chess. They forget that queens move quietly and end games in one stroke. If you've ever smiled through the storm, waiting for your moment to move, this story is for you. Subscribe to Everyday Dramas and see how Maya turns silence into power. Part 2, CRACKS in the glass. The morning after I saw the message, the world looked exactly the same. That was the cruelest part. Sunlight spilled across the marble floors, the city hummed below, and Ethan hummed too low off-key, as he poured his coffee like nothing had changed. But everything had. He kissed the top of my head, that automatic, absent gesture he did without looking. Morning, love, he said, the same words as always, same warmth, same performance. Only this time I didn't answer. I just studied him, the way he leaned on the counter, scrolling through his phone, smiling at a screen that wasn't me. He didn't notice the silence. He never did. Meeting at 9, lunch with investors, dinner at home, he asked as though my day should orbit his. Sure, I murmured. He left a few minutes later, the scent of his cologne lingering behind, expensive, arrogant, familiar. I stood by the window, coffee untouched, and watched his car pull out of the building's driveway. For the first time in years, I didn't cry. Instead, I thought. There's a moment right before a building collapses, when everything goes eerily still, a pause, a breath, and you can almost hear the structure giving way. That's what I felt that morning. Stillness, but not weakness. By mid-afternoon, I'd replayed every detail from the night before, the message, her tone at dinner, the way Ethan looked at her when he thought I wasn't watching. It wasn't just infidelity, it was betrayal wrapped in calculation, the same way he managed everything else. So I decided to calculate too. That evening I tidied the house, smiled when he walked in, poured his drink, asked about his day. He looked relieved, like the small storm he'd imagined had passed. And maybe that was the beginning of his downfall, his belief that I'd never be capable of silence that dangerous. Leela's fitting in well, he said casually, taking a sip. I pretended to glance at my phone as if distracted. She seems competent, I replied, voice light. He smiled, proud of himself for keeping his secret behind his teeth. But I saw the twitch, the small tightening near his jaw, the tell. Men like Ethan think lies are poker chips. They don't realize women like me memorize faces better than words. The rhythm of our lives continued, same events, same smiles, same lie. We hosted dinners, took photos, appeared unbreakable. But underneath, I was cataloguing everything. Every time he left his laptop open. Every time Leela's name appeared on his calendar. Every new habit, every changed password, every deleted text. I started a journal, just names, times, details, nothing emotional, only evidence. It wasn't for him, it was for me. A reminder that I wasn't crazy. That the problem wasn't me. Sometimes I'd stand in the mirror before bed, studying my reflection. My face looked calm, but my eyes were sharper, clearer. The exhaustion had burned into focus. He noticed once. You've been quiet lately, he said. I've been thinking, I replied. He laughed. That sounds dangerous. He had no idea how right he was. That weekend he invited Leela to a team retreat. Strictly work, he claimed. I didn't argue. I smiled, kissed him goodbye and waved from the window as he left. Then I called his driver and asked a simple question, one I'd never dared to ask before. Where did you drop him off today? The pause on the other end said enough. He wasn't going where he said he was. And that was when something inside me, something soft and loyal, quietly died. The woman he thought he could manipulate was gone. What remained was someone colder, quieter, infinitely more dangerous. I closed my journal, took a long breath, and whispered to my reflection. Let's begin. If you've ever pretended not to know, just to see how far the lie would go, this story is yours. Subscribe to Everyday Dramas and watch what Maya does next. Part 3: The Silent Breakdown. The first rule of survival is to look normal. People only notice when you change too quickly. So I didn't. I woke up every morning beside Ethan, made his coffee, smiled at the right moments, and performed my part with unnerving precision. On the outside, I was still the wife every woman envied, elegant, calm, composed. Inside, I was studying the architecture of collapse. The silence between us grew louder. Not the awkward kind, no, ours was beautifully rehearsed. He spoke about meetings and investors, and I nodded like I cared. I asked about Leela occasionally, just enough to sound supportive, not suspicious. It was strange, the more lies he told, the calmer I became. Almost peaceful. That's how you know something inside you has broken just right, when pain stops screaming and starts whispering instructions. By the third night of his retreat, I knew more than he thought. The driver had slipped up again, mentioning a hotel that wasn't on Ethan's schedule. The same one where Leela posted an anonymous picture of a wine glass on her story. The glass, I noticed, reflected Ethan's cufflink in the corner. A tiny, arrogant detail. Men always forget reflections. The next morning I dressed carefully, cream silk blouse, minimal jewelry, effortless grace. Not because of him. Because I'd realized something. Nothing disarms a guilty man like a woman who looks happy. When he returned that evening, guilt clung to him like humidity. He kissed me, called me beautiful, told me how much he'd missed me. It was almost funny, the rehearsed sincerity, the softness that appeared only after betrayal. I played along. Asked him about the conference, listened to his lies, even laughed at the right spots. Everything okay? He asked. I smiled, held his gaze a heartbeat too long. Everything's perfect. That's when he looked away. That night I didn't sleep. I watched him instead, the rise and fall of his chest, the faint twitch of his mouth, the little sighs he made in his sleep. He looked peaceful, almost innocent. And that's when I understood. He didn't just lie to me, he believed his lies. He'd built an entire personality out of them. And I'd spent years funding that illusion with my loyalty. I turned over, staring at the ceiling. It wasn't sadness anymore, it was something sharper. A cold, electric clarity. They say grief makes you softer. It didn't. It made me precise. People around us started noticing something, not wrong, just different. At charity events I smiled brighter, my laughter carried further. Ethan basked in it, thinking it was admiration. But it wasn't joy. It was control. Every compliment, every social post, every photo, all of it was fuel for what I was building. He thought I was healing. I was documenting. The cracks in the glass were spreading, invisible but unstoppable. And soon, all it would take was one gentle push. Part 4: The Gathering Storm. Revenge doesn't arrive like thunder. It drips a slow, measured patient. And by the time you notice the flood, it's already too late. A week after Ethan's retreat, I started with something small, the art of pretending not to care. He'd been careless lately. Passwords changed, phone always face down, late nights at the office. Once upon a time, I'd have asked why. Now I simply observed. The first test was simple. I left my own phone unlocked, open on the kitchen counter, with a message thread clearly visible, one that hinted at a private meeting with D. It was harmless, a fake name, a fabricated chat with a friend who owed me a favor. But I knew Ethan's. He couldn't resist curiosity, dressed as temptation. By evening, the phone had moved an inch from where I'd left it. He hadn't confronted me, no, that would expose his guilt. Instead, he was distant, unusually polite, his smile a little too tight. Good. He was nervous. A few days later, I made another move, social, not digital. At a charity gala, I wore black, a deliberate contrast to the usual soft tones he preferred on me. It was sleek, silent power. The kind that turns heads and makes whispers. People noticed. especially Daniel, a longtime family friend, sharp, wealthy, and inconveniently attentive. When he greeted me with a compliment and a lingering handshake, I saw Ethan's jaw tighten. A flicker of jealousy. It lasted less than a second, but it was enough. The hypocrisy made me want to laugh. He was sleeping with his assistant, but the idea of another man admiring his wife threatened his ego. Ethan didn't love me anymore. He loved the control of being the one to discard me first. So I decided he wouldn't get that satisfaction. The next phase wasn't about confrontation, it was about preparation. I reached out to Clara, my oldest friend, the kind of woman people underestimate because she smiles too much and listens too well. Over lunch, I told her pieces of the truth, not everything, just enough to make her curious. "Don't do anything yet," she warned softly. "Oh, I won't," I said, "not until I know exactly how far he's willing to go." We both knew that was a lie. By the end of the week, she'd introduced me to someone discreet, expensive, reliable. A private investigator who specialized in corporate deceit. He didn't need many details. Just the name Ethan Cole. Back at home, I began to rebuild my routine, but with intention. Every smile was practiced. Every dinner conversation was a rehearsal for something larger. I started wearing my hair differently. I laughed more around others. And I made sure Ethan saw me typing, but never saw what I typed. It was fascinating, watching him unravel in real time. He couldn't quite accuse me of anything, but his guilt made him paranoid. He started asking where I'd been, who I'd spoken to, why I was so distracted lately. It was ironic, really. The liar terrified of being lied to. That night, after another forced dinner, I watched him retreat to his office. His reflection appeared faintly in the window, hunched over his laptop, the same posture he used to have when he still loved me. Except now, the light from the screen illuminated something else, a man desperate to protect the very secret that would destroy him. I whispered to the empty room, "You're not the only one who can play this game, Ethan." And for the first time I smiled, not because I forgave him, but because I finally understood something. Revenge isn't about anger. It's about timing. Part 5, the UNIVLING. The strange thing about lies is how heavy they become when you stop trying to carry them. Once I stopped pretending to believe him, Ethan began to crumble under the weight of his own deceit. It started small, misplaced keys, restless nights, an edge in his voice that hadn't been there before. Every word he said came out half a second too late, like a man rehearsing his lines mid-performance. Our home had always been immaculate, curated for the life we were supposed to have. White walls, art that whispered sophistication, diffused candles that made everything smell faintly of success. But lately it felt different. Still beautiful, yes, but too quiet. The kind of quiet that hums beneath the skin. I noticed it most at night. The clock in the hallway ticked louder. The air felt heavier. Even the soft clink of glass on marble sounded intrusive, like a noise in a cathedral. Ethan hated it. He'd pace sometimes, barefoot, shirt unbuttoned, pretending to read emails while really watching me. Every few minutes, he'd glance up as if expecting me to accuse him. I never did. That was the point. By the second week, his mistress started making mistakes. Her messages came too frequently, her tone too possessive. She didn't understand that men like Ethan love control more than affection, and nothing terrifies them like being claimed publicly. One evening during dinner, his phone buzzed. He froze mid-sentence, mid-breath. The screen lit up just long enough for me to catch a glimpse of her name. Leela. He turned the phone over, his hand trembling ever so slightly. "Everything okay?" I asked, tilting my head just enough to look innocent. "Work," he muttered, "nothing urgent." I smiled, "Of course." Then I cut my steak, one precise slice after another in silence. The sound of the knife against porcelain filled the space between us, rhythmic, deliberate. He couldn't look at me. That's when I realized I didn't need to expose him. I only needed to let his own fear do the work. Later that night while he showered, I stood before the mirror in the walk-in closet. The lighting was soft, almost theatrical, flattering in the way expensive houses always are. I studied my reflection the way one studies a stranger. There was a time I'd stared into this same mirror, rehearsing apologies for things that weren't my fault, too cold, too distant, too career-driven, too something. Now I rehearsed something else. Stillness. Not indifference, no. Stillness is deliberate. It's the art of being unreadable. He came out of the shower, towel around his waist, avoiding my gaze. Long day, he said. Then you should rest, I replied softly. I brushed past him, my perfume lingering in the air. He caught my wrist too tightly, then let go. That split second of contact told me everything. He was losing control. Not over me, over himself. 2 nights later, his assistant called. By mistake. A video call. It lasted 3 seconds, maybe less, just enough for me to see the inside of a hotel room and Ethan's voice in the background. She hung up immediately. I didn't react. Didn't mention it. Didn't even flinch. Instead, I went into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of red wine, and stood by the window overlooking the city. The lights below flickered, tiny lives moving, lying, loving, pretending. I sipped slowly and whispered to my reflection in the glass. Almost. When Ethan came home the next morning, his collar was unbuttoned, his expression rehearsed. He kissed me out of habit, not affection. And in that moment, the faint scent of perfume that wasn't mine, the guilt clinging to him like static, I finally saw him clearly. He wasn't a monster. He was just as small. A man who mistook power for love and deceit for cleverness. And I had outgrown both. The investigator's report arrived that evening. A plain envelope slipped under the door, thick with evidence, photos, receipts, hotel records. Proof, finally. I didn't open it. Not yet. I wanted to savor the anticipation, the slow bloom of justice before it flowers into chaos. The silence that night was different. Not oppressive, not painful. It was expectant. Like the air before a storm finally breaks. If you've ever watched someone dig their own grave and called it patience, this chapter was written for you. Subscribe to Everyday Dramas to see how Maya's silence finally speaks. Part 6, The Fall. The night the storm broke, it didn't come with thunder. It came with quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you aware of every breath, every ticking second, every thought you shouldn't be thinking. The envelope still sat where I'd left it, untouched, unopened, patient. A quiet guest at the edge of the dining table. I'd walked past it all day, pretending not to notice. But the truth was, it noticed me. Secrets always do. The sky outside was the color of bruised steel. Ethan was late again. I'd set the table anyway, candles lit, wine breathing, plates waiting like props on a stage. When he finally came in, the air followed him, heavy with rain and guilt. He smiled, that thin, performative smile. Long day, he said, shaking his hair. Of course, I replied, tone level. He hung his jacket carefully, avoiding my eyes. That was new. He used to hold my gaze as if daring me to doubt him. Now he couldn't. We ate mostly in silence. The cutlery sounded too loud, the ticking clock too sharp. Halfway through dinner, he cleared his throat. You've been different lately. Different how? I don't know, distant. I looked up slowly. Maybe I'm just seeing things clearly now. He laughed, but it came out wrong, strained, brittle. What's that supposed to mean? Exactly what it sounds like. He poured himself more wine, avoiding the envelope that sat between us like a living thing. Finally, his curiosity gave in. What's that? Evidence, I said softly. His hand froze midair. He looked at me, then at the envelope, then back at me again, a flicker of panic crossing his face before he smoothed it over. What are you talking about? He asked. I didn't answer. I simply slid the envelope toward him. The sound of paper against wood was deafening. He hesitated, then opened it. Photographs, receipts, timestamps all laid bare. Each piece of proof landed like a heartbeat. He went pale. "Who gave you this? Does it matter?" Maya listened. "I did for years. You just never said anything worth hearing." He tried to reach for me, maybe for comfort, maybe for control. I stepped back. That small gesture broke something between us, something invisible, something final. "I can explain," he said, voice cracking. "I know you can," I replied. "That's what makes you dangerous." He stared at me, desperate now, furious. "You can't destroy everything we've built." I smiled, slow and cold. "I'm not destroying it, Ethan. I'm just letting it fall." He left that night. No dramatic exit, no shouting. Just the quiet sound of a door closing, like a sigh at the end of a long, beautiful lie. I stood there for a long time, alone in the candlelight, the city glimmering beyond the glass. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was earned. I poured myself another glass of wine and whispered to no one. "Now we begin." The world went on. Emails, calls, polite smiles, business as usual. But I wasn't the same. I met Clara for coffee, told her what happened. She didn't ask if I was okay. She just nodded and said, "You did it beautifully." Later that day, my lawyer called. "The transfer is done, the accounts are separate, the property titles too." Ethan hadn't noticed yet, but he would soon. Piece by piece, everything he'd built with my silence was now mine, legally, quietly, irrevocably. The world would call it a divorce. But it was. It was extraction, clean, surgical, poetic. I went home that evening, drew the curtains, and finally allowed myself to smile, not in victory, but in relief. Because revenge isn't about watching them fall. It's about watching yourself rise without ever needing to look back. If you've ever realized peace can be the loudest revenge, this one's for you. Subscribe to Everyday Dramas to see how Maya rebuilds what he tried to ruin. Part 7, The Reckoning. There's a moment before the end, quiet, suspended, almost beautiful, when everything you've built starts to come undone. For Ethan, that moment arrived on a Thursday morning, just as the city was waking. The news broke first on the finance channels, not screaming headlines, not scandal, just facts. Leaked emails, transfer records, offshore accounts tied to his company's funds. Then came the speculation. Then came the reporters. By noon, the building was surrounded. I watched it unfold from my apartment window. The same glass that had once reflected my tears now mirrored my composure. The city below buzzed with chaos, camera lights, police cars, whispers that turned into echoes. Ethan's name filled the air like a bad melody, repeated on every screen, dissected, judged, replayed. The evidence hadn't come from me directly. I just left it where it could be found. A misplaced USB. A forwarded email chain. A truth too heavy to stay hidden. He'd done all the work himself. All I did was stop protecting him. My phone rang once, his name flashing across the screen. For a long moment I just stared at it. Then I answered. "Maya," his voice cracked, raw with panic. "They're saying things, the company, it's all lies. You have to believe me." I stayed silent. "Maya, please, you have to tell them, you know I wouldn't." I could hear the chaos behind him, sirens, voices, the press shouting questions. Finally I said softly, "Ethan, I don't have to tell them anything." The silence that followed was thick. Not empty, heavy. He tried again, voice trembling. "You think this makes you win?" I smiled faintly, though he couldn't see it. "I'm not playing anymore." And I hung up. That evening, the crowd outside his office grew. News vans, police tape. Flashes that turned the night into stuttering daylight. I walked past it all, calm, unseen in the chaos. Someone shouted his name, cameras turned, the world tilted. There he was, the man who once controlled every room he entered, now surrounded, shouting, desperate to be heard. "Listen to me, it's all lies." He looked up suddenly, and our eyes met across the crowd. That was the moment from the beginning, the one that started this story. His face drained of color. He mouthed my name, Maya. Not angry, not pleading, just stunned. Because for the first time, he realized I was the silence behind his downfall. The red and blue lights painted everything surreal. Cameras flashed, capturing him mid-collapse. And me. I just stood there, still and quiet, watching the man who once made me small finally come apart under his own weight. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just watched. Because that's what truth deserves to be seen. By the time the sirens faded, the story had already gone global. Ethan Cole, the visionary investor, the charming husband, the man who had it all. Now just another scandal, another cautionary tale of greed and betrayal. I walked home alone that night. The air smelled of rain and something cleaner like relief. Inside, I poured a glass of wine, sat by the window, and watched the city lights flicker against the glass. Not victory. Not vengeance. Just peace. I finally whispered to myself. It's done. And somewhere deep inside, I felt the quiet shift of something being put to rest. If you've ever been accused of being too quiet, remember, silence can be the loudest ending. Subscribe to Everyday Dramas to see what Maya does after the storm clears. Part 8 ASHES of the Lie. The world loves a scandal more than it loves the truth. By the weekend, Ethan's face was everywhere, his smile dissected, his words replayed, his downfall turned into breakfast entertainment. The same anchors who once called him a visionary now used words like fraud, deception, and fall from grace. It was as though they'd all been waiting for permission to turn on him. I watched it happen in silence, news tickers rolling, comment sections raging, strangers speaking like they'd known him their whole lives. I didn't correct them. I didn't defend him. I just watched. The company board cut him loose first. Then the sponsors. Then the friends, the ones who toasted him at dinners, worn his success like reflected sunlight. Within 3 days, he was no longer Ethan Cole, the investor everyone admired. He was a cautionary tale, a man people avoided in conversations. When he tried to deny the accusations, no one listened. His words had lost their currency. And the press, they wanted sound bites. They wanted tears, a villain, a wife. They wanted me. Reporters camped outside the apartment for days, flashing lights like vultures circling. Mrs. Cole, how much did you know? Did you help expose him? Was your marriage a lie? I never answered. I'd step outside with my sunglasses on, coffee in hand, and walk past them like their noise couldn't reach me. Because it couldn't, not anymore. But silence has its own weight. When the cameras left and the city went quiet again, I sat alone in the living room, the same one that once echoed with his voice, his laughter, his promises. Now it was still. Too still. I'd thought revenge would feel like fire. But it felt like fog, soft, quiet, lingering. The satisfaction wasn't sharp. It was gentle. Almost sad. Because the truth was, I didn't just destroy Ethan. I destroyed the version of me that loved him. The one who made excuses. The one who smiled through lies. The one who thought love meant enduring pain. She was gone too. And maybe that was the real ending. The next morning I went to the balcony, sunlight spilling through thin curtains, the city humming far below. For the first time, I noticed how quiet the world could be when it wasn't filled with his noise. The air smelled different. Even the coffee tasted cleaner. I spent the day packing away reminders, cufflinks, photos, expensive gifts that suddenly felt cheap. One by one, they went into boxes. Not with anger. With closure. When the last box shut, I whispered, "Goodbye, Ethans." And for the first time in years, I meant it. She didn't post on social media. She didn't tell anyone her side. She simply disappeared from the noise. Because sometimes the most elegant revenge isn't destruction, it's disappearance. Part 9: The Rebirths. There's a strange calm that follows ruin. It doesn't arrive all at once, it seeps in, like sunlight through half-closed blinds, touching the spaces grief used to fill. For weeks after Ethan's downfall, I barely spoke. Not because I was broken, but because silence had become my language. And in that quiet, I began to see life differently. I moved out of the penthouse first. It had always felt like a stage: cold marble, sharp lines, rooms built for display, not for living. The new place was smaller. White walls, warm light, plants on every surface. I painted one wall a deep olive green, the color of calm, and when the brush slid over the blank plaster, I felt something lift from my chest. I slept without music, without alarms, without waiting for footsteps in the hall. Each morning, I woke to the sound of birds and traffic and coffee, bubbling on the stove, ordinary things that felt sacred. I stopped checking the news, stopped replaying the moment he fell, stopped needing closure from a story that had already ended. I started writing again, not about Ethan, not about what happened, but about the strange beauty of rebuilding. Little essays, half poems, quiet reflections on truth and control. One morning, on a whim, I posted one online under a pen name. It was called The Weight of Quiet. Within days, it went viral. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was honest. Women wrote to say it felt like something they'd never been allowed to admit, that silence could heal as much as it hides. I didn't respond. I just kept writing. Soon, people began asking for more. Publishers reached out. Interviews were requested. But I declined them all. Because for the first time in my life, my story wasn't something to sell. It was something to live. One afternoon at a small cafe near the river, I saw someone familiar at the counter, an old colleague of Ethan. He recognized me instantly, froze, then smiled awkwardly. "I read that article," he said quietly. "Didn't realize it was you." I smiled, soft but steady. "It is not anymore." He nodded, hesitated. "You're doing okay." "I'm doing better than okay," I said. And I meant it. When I left the cafe, the sunlight hit my face, and I realized I was walking lighter, as if forgiveness wasn't something I'd given to him, but something I'd finally given to myself. By summer, I had finished the manuscript, not about revenge, not even about love, but about returning to yourself. It wasn't a confession. It was a reclamation. The final page read, "Some endings are not meant to destroy. They are meant to free." When I printed the last draft, I placed it on the table beside a single candle and a glass of wine. The city shimmered outside, alive, unpredictable, uncaring. And for the first time, I didn't feel like a ghost in it. I felt alive. Part 10: Her Own Names. It had been almost a year since the world had last spoken Ethan Cole's name. The news cycle had moved on: new scandals, new faces, new chaos to consume. But in quiet corners, in late-night conversations, people still whispered about the wife who vanished when her husband fell. They called her the woman who disappeared. I liked that. Because disappearance isn't always loss. Sometimes it's evolution. It was a crisp autumn evening when I finally stepped back into the world, not as a shadow, not as a rumor, but as an author. The small independent bookstore in Soho was filled with low light and murmuring voices. Stacks of my book, The Weight of Quiet, stood on a wooden table near the window, their minimalist covers catching the glow of the lamps. I hadn't planned a launch, the publisher insisted. "People need to see the face behind the words," they said. I wasn't sure they did, but I came anyway. When I arrived, the room went still in that polite, curious way people do when they sense a story behind a person. I could feel their eyes studying, wondering. Was that her? The wife? The silent one? I smiled softly, said nothing, and walked to the table. The signing began. Halfway through the evening, a young woman approached, mid-20s. Trembling slightly, holding a copy of the book like it might shatter. She leaned in, voice low. "I know who you are," she said. I met her gaze, calm, open. "Do you?" She swallowed. "I went through something similar. Everyone told me to forgive and forget, but your words, they made me feel like it's okay to remember." Her eyes glistened. "How did you do it?" For a moment I didn't answer, then I said quietly, "I stopped trying to fix what broke me. I built something new instead." She nodded, tears falling freely now. "Thank you." And I signed her book, For the Ones Who Choose Silence, and then choose themselves. Later, as the crowd thinned, I stepped outside for air. The street was glowing with streetlights, the air carrying the faint smell of rain and roasted chestnuts. And then a voice behind me. "Maya." It had been so long since I'd heard it that it almost felt like fiction. I turned. Ethan stood a few feet away, thinner, quieter, stripped of the arrogance that once clung to him like a second skin. He looked like a man still trying to recognize himself. "I didn't come to cause a scene," he said softly. "I just wanted to see if you were okay." I studied him, not the man I once loved, not the man who betrayed me, but the man who had finally fallen from the pedestal I'd built for him. "I am," I said. He nodded, eyes flicking down. "You look different." "I am." For a long moment we just stood there, two people bound by a story that had already ended. Then he said, almost a whisper, "I'm sorry, Maya." I smiled faintly. "I know." And with that I turned and walked away, not out of anger, not out of pride, but because I no longer needed anything from him. Not explanation. Not forgiveness. Not closure. The story had closed itself. When I reached home, I placed the last signed copy of the book on my shelf. The spine caught the light, my name, printed cleanly across it. Maya Coles. For a moment I stared at it, the name I once wanted to escape, now reclaimed, redefined. I touched the cover and whispered, "You're home." And for the first time in years, I said my own name aloud, not as an echo of his, but as a declaration of self. Maya. No longer the wife. No longer the victim. Just Maya. Epilogue. Outside the rain began, soft, rhythmic, endless. I opened the window and let it in, the scent of it mixing with the faint perfume of lilies on my desk. The city pulsed below, alive, indifferent, beautiful. I raised my glass to the night, not in celebration, but in gratitude. Because endings aren't meant to erase the past. They are meant to remind you that you survived it. And I had. If Maya's journey moved you, if you've ever rebuilt yourself from silence, subscribe to Everyday Dramas for more stories that remind you. Survival can be beautiful.